Hello again. In this session, we are going to talk about nationalism, self-determination with a focus on the origins of the modern states in the Middle East. So, at the heart of nationalism is the idea that nations are distinct entities, and that this belongs to each nation should have self-determination, and that's a problem just like we talked about in our nation and states. Because the problem here is that not every nation can become a state. No. We have more than 3,000, based on a statistic, we have more than 3,500 nations in the world. And that's actually impossible. There's no way that each nation can have unified territory, president, military, parliament, people, sovereignty. This would be impossible. That's what makes the idea of nationalism complicated. Each nation has the right to form its own political, legal, and administrative order located within a territorial area or homeland. That's based on the Charter of the United Nations. Nationalism, therefore, extends the idea of nationhood into the political. Like I talked about, nationalism and the idea of the nation is politics related, and whatever politics related can create problems. So different definition for self-determination is that here that you can live with other nations, which is something positive. Because here it tells us that it's no problem. You are from a different nation, like I am a Kurd, you are an Arab, you are a Polish, and the other is a Swedish. You can live together. You don't have to have your own state. You can peacefully live together, addressing here the ideology of humanity first, ahead of religion, ahead of nationalism, ahead of everything else. So as a political doctrine, nationalism is the belief that the world's peoples are divided into nations, and that each of these nations has the right to self-determination, either as governing units or as a nation, states of their own. So each nation can live having governing units within nations, like federal regions, federal states. Like each state has its own governing unit, living with another major nation, for example, or having nation states of their own, like Poland, Italy, Germany, and other states. But we have to remember that even inside those states, we are having other nations, like I addressed in the previous sessions, Iraq, Spain, for example. So as a cultural idea, nationalism is the claim that while men and women have many identities, it's the nation that provides them with a primary form of belonging. So maybe a man calls itself a woman, a female calls itself a man in the general. But bigger than that, we are having the nation that gives a primary identity. So you could be, for example, Polish as a nation in the international relations. But as a person, you can be a teacher, you can be a man, a woman, you can be like however you want to define yourself. It's the state that gives you the general identity, and of course, it's probably the biggest identity because it has to do with the international politics and relations. So, as a moral ideal, nationalism is an ethnic and a heroic sacrifice. Because just like we talked about in the previous session, the political leader can say that we need to fight for our own homeland, for our history. So those who are fighting for it, those who protected it, those who created the nation, those who protected the people can be called heroes. And people have no problem dying for their nation. And of course, this will justify the use of violence. This will bring about the use of violence. That, for example, results in the death of millions of people in the world wars of the 20th century in the West. In the defense of one's nation against enemies, just like we're talking about the idea of us and them. Because nationalism is basically something that differentiates people. It's prescriptive and not merely descriptive, in the sense that you cannot just say that nationalism, like I'm just describing nationalism, but it's prescriptive in the sense that it motivates you, and it's something that you cannot ignore. President Reagan, for example, has a saying that if you want to ignore politics, politics cannot ignore you. If you don't have interest in politics, saying, I don't care about the government and the politics, it doesn't mean that the government doesn't care about you. So same goes for here as well. Nationalism is something that you cannot ignore. Just like politics is something that nobody can ignore. As long as there will be human beings, there will be politics. Woodrow Wilson, the previous president of the United States, opposed the idea of empires and believed that nations should govern themselves. And of course, that has to do with the Versailles Conference following World War I, and this has to do with the origin of the modern states in the Middle East, like I talked about in the beginning of the previous session, because urged by this idea, encouraged by this idea, and the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the decolonization period, we had a number of states, and of course, following the idea of nationalism, the age of nationalism, we should remember, in the 19th century. That's why the Arab states of the Middle East tried to become state. We had the modern state of Turkey, for example, and of course, excluding some other nations, for example, the Kurds, who are the nation which are 40 million people living in the Middle East and dividing into the four countries, like I talked about Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, but without a state. Well, they have every right to become a state, and that's why they are still fighting. They're fighting the Turkish government, the Iraqi Kurds as well, also have high nationalism agendas. We have some administrative units in Syria as well, and of course in Iran we are having those political parties, and they are fooled by the idea of nationalism. So self-determination has consequently become an important guiding principle in international politics, fooled by nationalism, and this principle also represents the idea of nation, the state creation at the expense of existing states, which means that we are having a number of states in the world. They are created, but then in the expense of other states. And actually, Kurdistan in Iraq can be an example here. Kurdish states, for example, or in general, in the Middle East, say we have all the features to become a state, all the characters, but then we are giving to other states. Catalonians, for example, could say so. Scottish can say so as well. And that's what we mean, that states are created at the expense of other nations. Self-determination was occurring partly encouraged by the United Nations, but also because of the changing economic status of many imperial powers, such as Britain, France, Germany, for example. Those were historical colonial powers. And of course, the demise of feminism resulting wars as well. We have the 15 republics after 1991, which Poland can be an example. Ukraine can be an example, the Central Asian countries as well, which were all parts of the Soviet Union. But of course it went violent in Yugoslavia, for example, and many people died out of it. The creation of the new states, such as the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, and many others follow the principle of the self-determination. From 1945 until the end of the Cold War, Yugoslavia was a communist state in which national, social, and religious differences were suppressed by the government, and that resulted in the violence and ethnic conflicts that we don't have time to talk in detail now. There was a fight between Serbs, Croats, Bosnian, and Muslims as a part of this idea of nationalism until NATO intervened. So. Advantages and disadvantages of nationalism. We can have some advantages, like nationalism is the major force behind the breakup of states and empires, because empires have many, like they conquered many peoples, but within the states, people had their own freedom. Consequently, nationalism often cited as a source of wars as a disadvantage, for example, and ethnic conflicts and persecution of minorities. Nationalism, that in 19th century was a positive term that brought people together, an advantage. As in the case of Germany, the experiences of the 20th century, the world wars, also discredited the idea of nationalism. Nazism and fascism can be examples here. And we have some main types of nationalism, like civic nationalism, ethnic nationalism, cultural nationalism, liberal, pan, and diaspora nationalism as well. And here we have some video tutorials. You're going to have the slides, by the way. I know I did not address each point in the slides, but you're going to have the slides. and know more about it. And here we have some tutorial videos concerning nationalism and nation state. And here we are having some questions as well, like, do nations have the right to form their own states? How can nationalism lead to violence? How is nationalism related to heroism? Nationalism and new communist states, what is the relation between them, and what can be some types of nationalism? And thank you.